It all began with a wave of silence from the royal household, the kind of silence that always makes the public more curious than any official statement ever could. For weeks, Catherine and William had been appearing less frequently in public. Scheduled appearances were reduced, engagements were quietly adjusted, and even planned events seemed to shift without much explanation. At first, most people didn't think much of it. After all, members of the royal family often stepped back for privacy, family time, or routine health checkups. But then, the speculation began. Reports started circulating online suggesting that something more serious might be happening behind palace doors. Nothing was confirmed, nothing was officially announced, but the absence of clarity created a vacuum, and that vacuum was quickly filled with questions. And that is where this story truly begins. According to ongoing rumors and unverified reports discussed across social platforms and tabloids, a private medical consultation allegedly led to information that deeply affected both Catherine and William. The details remain unconfirmed, but what followed in public discussion painted a picture of emotional strain and intense private conversations within the royal circle. As these rumors spread, the public narrative quickly shifted from curiosity to concern. People began noticing subtle changes. William appearing more reserved during public moments. Catherine's appearances becoming even more carefully managed. Every small detail was now being analyzed under a microscope. And in stories like this, even silence becomes a message. What makes this situation so widely discussed is not just the idea of health concerns, but the emotional weight of responsibility that comes with their roles. Unlike ordinary public figures, every personal challenge for them carries not only private consequences, but public interpretation as well. And that pressure is something few can fully understand from the outside. As speculation grew, so did emotional storytelling online. Some claimed the couple was facing a deeply personal family health challenge. Others suggested it was a routine but sensitive medical update that required privacy and adjustment. And many simply expressed concern, hoping that whatever the truth may be, it would not be something too serious. But behind all of this, one thing remained consistent: the human reaction to uncertainty. Because when people hear news involving health, family, or emotional strain, especially about figures they admire, they naturally imagine the emotional weight behind closed doors. And that is where this story takes a more emotional direction. If we imagine the reality of such a moment, receiving unexpected or difficult medical information in a private setting, it becomes clear how overwhelming it could be, not because of public attention, but because of the personal impact such news can have on any family, regardless of status or position. In that private space, titles don't matter. Protocol doesn't matter. Only the reality of the moment matters. And that is often where the strongest emotional reactions happen. Support systems become essential in moments like these. Partners rely on each other more than ever. Conversations become quieter, more careful, more meaningful. Decisions are no longer about public appearance, but about private understanding. And while none of the rumored details about Catherine and William have been confirmed, the public fascination with their emotional world reflects something deeper about human nature. People connect with vulnerability. People understand uncertainty. And people instinctively empathize with moments where strength is quietly tested. That is why stories like this spread so quickly online. Because they are not just about individuals. They are about universal emotions: concern, curiosity, empathy, and the fear of the unknown. As discussions continued, official silence remained the same. No dramatic statements. No public confirmation of anything alarming. Just a continued presence of duty, appearances when required, and carefully maintained privacy. And that silence, once again, became its own form of communication. In the absence of facts, narratives grow. Some grounded in concern, others in imagination. And somewhere in between, the truth remains known only to those directly involved. But what this situation ultimately highlights is something important. Even the most public lives still contain deeply private realities that the world may never fully see or understand. And that is where respect becomes essential. Because behind every headline, every rumor, and every viral discussion, there are real people navigating real emotions, often far away from public interpretation. So when people hear phrases like shocking news or emotional reaction, it is important to remember that real life is often far more complex than simplified narratives online. And sometimes, the most responsible way to understand stories like this is not through assumption, but through patience. waiting for clarity, respecting privacy, and recognizing the difference between speculation and confirmed reality. Because in the end, whether royal or not, every family experiences moments that are not meant for public consumption. And perhaps that is the most important takeaway of all. Not the rumor, not the headline, but the reminder that behind every public figure, there is always a private life that deserves understanding, not assumption. As time passed, the public attention didn't slow down. In fact, it grew stronger. Every appearance by Catherine and William was now watched more closely than ever before. A simple smile was analyzed. A brief moment of distance was interpreted. Even silence between public engagements became part of the narrative. And that is one of the most difficult parts of living under constant visibility. Nothing is ever just normal again. But inside the palace, life continued with structure and discipline. Duties still had to be fulfilled. Responsibilities still had to be managed. And no matter what was being discussed outside, the internal rhythm of royal life does not stop easily. For Catherine and William, that meant balancing two worlds at once. One world is public, where every move is seen, recorded, and discussed. And another world is private, where real decisions, emotions, and conversations take place away from cameras. And those private moments are often where the real weight of any situation is carried. In stories like this, people often focus on dramatic interpretations. But the reality of serious personal or medical discussions is usually far quieter. It is not about shock or spectacle. It is about information being processed, priorities being adjusted, and decisions being made carefully and responsibly. And that process is rarely visible to the outside world. What makes the public so emotionally engaged in stories like this is not just curiosity, it is connection. Many people see reflections of their own lives in moments of uncertainty, health concerns, family responsibilities, unexpected news. These are universal experiences, even if the setting is completely different. That emotional connection is what drives attention, but it can also distort perception. Because when real human situations are turned into online narratives, they often lose their nuance. Words like breakdown or shocking news are powerful, but they also simplify complex emotional realities that are rarely so clear in real life. Behind closed doors, reactions are not always dramatic. Sometimes they are quiet. Sometimes they are controlled. Sometimes strength looks like calm acceptance rather than visible emotion. And that is something the public rarely sees. As discussions continued across media and social platforms, experts and commentators began to emphasize a different perspective. That speculation should always be separated from confirmed information, especially when it involves personal health or family matters. This reminder became important, because once a narrative spreads widely, it often takes on a life of its own, even without verified facts. And that is where responsibility matters, because public figures, despite their visibility, still retain the right to privacy in deeply personal situations. And audiences, while naturally curious, also play a role in how respectfully those situations are discussed. Over time, attention tends to shift. New stories emerge. New headlines take focus. But the people at the center of earlier discussions continue living their lives beyond the noise. And that is often forgotten. For Catherine and William, like anyone in a position of responsibility, life is not defined by a single moment or rumor. It is defined by years of service, family, and duty carried consistently over time. That larger picture is often missing from viral narratives. And when we zoom out from the immediate emotional reaction, a more balanced understanding begins to form. Not everything intense is dramatic. Not everything private is negative. And not everything widely discussed is fully understood. Sometimes, it is simply life happening behind the scenes. And as this story settles, what remains most important is perspective. To recognize the difference between speculation and reality. To understand the weight of public attention. And to remember that real people exist behind every headline. Because at the end of the day, stories may spread quickly, but truth is usually quieter, and far more complex than it first appears. And as the noise around the story slowly begins to settle, something else becomes clearer: how quickly public emotion can rise around uncertainty, and just as quickly shift once attention moves elsewhere. In the modern world of instant news and viral discussion, stories often travel faster than facts. A single phrase can spark thousands of interpretations. A small detail can be expanded into a larger narrative. And before long, the original situation becomes layered with opinions, assumptions, and emotional reactions from every direction. That is exactly why situations involving public figures often become so widely discussed, even when confirmed information is limited. But behind all of that, life does not operate at the speed of the internet. It moves at a human pace. Private conversations take time. Decisions are made carefully. Information is processed step by step, not in headlines or short clips. And in families, especially those under public attention, clarity is something that is built quietly, not announced immediately. For Catherine and William, as with any couple facing important personal moments, the focus is rarely on outside reaction. It is on understanding, communication, and support within their own private space. And that space is something the public will never fully see. What makes stories like this emotionally powerful is that they sit at the intersection of public image and private reality. People are naturally drawn to the idea that they are getting a glimpse behind the curtain. But in reality, most of what feels like behind the scenes is still only surface-level interpretation. The deeper reality remains protected, and perhaps that is necessary, because not every moment is meant to be shared. Not every emotional experience is meant to be analyzed, and not every private situation is meant to become public discussion. In many ways, that separation is what allows people in high-pressure roles to continue functioning normally. Without boundaries, the weight of public attention will become overwhelming. So silence, in many cases, is not absence, it is protection. It is space to think, space to process, space to live without constant interpretation. And when that space is respected, it allows real stability to exist behind the scenes, even when the outside world is uncertain. Over time, most viral stories fade. New headlines take over. Public focus shifts elsewhere. But what remains is a reminder of how easily narratives form and how important it is to approach them with caution rather than assumption. Because once something becomes widely believed online, it often feels like truth, even when it is not fully verified. And that is where media literacy becomes important. Understanding that emotional headlines are designed to capture attention, understanding that uncertainty often fuels speculation, and understanding that real life is rarely as simple as the way it is presented online. For Catherine and William, their public roles will continue, their responsibilities will continue, and like before, life will move forward in a way that balances duty with privacy. And for the public, attention will eventually move on to other stories, other events, other discussions. But the broader lesson remains. Behind every headline, there are real people. Behind every rumor, there is often missing context. And behind every dramatic interpretation, there is usually a quieter, more grounded reality. And when we remember that, we begin to see these stories differently, not as entertainment alone, but as reminders of the importance of empathy, patience, and perspective in how we consume information. Because in the end, not everything that trends tells a full story. And not every story that feels complete online actually is. As the days go on, the intensity of online discussion often begins to fade, but the underlying curiosity never fully disappears. That is because stories involving well-known public figures tend to leave a lasting impression, especially when they involve emotion, uncertainty, or speculation. People continue to revisit details, rewatch moments, and analyze appearances, searching for meaning in things that may not have any hidden message at all. And that cycle is something modern media has made almost automatic. Attention builds quickly, spreads widely, and then slowly settles, leaving behind fragments of interpretation. But in reality, life does not exist in fragments. It exists in continuity. And for Catherine and William, continuity means returning to routine, responsibilities, and family life, regardless of external conversation. Public expectations do not pause, but neither does personal life. Both continue side by side, often without intersecting in the way people imagine. What is often misunderstood in stories like this is the idea that public silence equals public drama. But in many cases, silence simply means privacy is being maintained. Not everything requires explanation. Not every moment needs confirmation. And not every personal matter is intended for public consumption. That distinction is important, because without it, speculation fills every gap. And speculation, once it becomes widespread, can start to feel like truth, even when it has no confirmed foundation. That is how narratives grow beyond their original meaning. They become shaped not by facts, but by emotion, repetition, and interpretation. This is why responsible consumption of information matters so much in the digital age. Headlines are designed to capture attention quickly. Emotional language is used to increase engagement, and dramatic phrasing often spreads faster than careful, balanced reporting. So when phrases like breakdown or shocking reveal appear, they naturally trigger strong reactions. But those reactions are often based on perception rather than verified detail. And that is where perspective becomes essential. Because behind every widely discussed story are real people navigating real situations, often with far more nuance than what is visible to the public. Their experiences are not shaped by headlines, but by personal reality, which unfolds gradually and privately. In many ways, the public only ever sees the outline of a story, never the full picture. And yet, that outline is often treated as complete. But completeness requires context. And context is usually the first thing lost when information spreads quickly online. Over time, most public discussions naturally evolve. Interest shifts, new events take over attention, and the emotional intensity surrounding earlier stories slowly fades. But what remains is a pattern, how quickly assumptions form, and how easily narratives grow without full information. And that pattern is not unique to this story. It reflects a broader reality about how modern media and public attention operate. In a world where everything is instant, patience becomes rare, but understanding still requires it. Because real life does not move at the speed of viral content. It moves through conversations, decisions, reflection, and time. And those processes are rarely visible from the outside. For Catherine and William, like any individuals in the public eye, life continues beyond interpretation. Responsibilities remain, roles are fulfilled, and personal life carries on away from external discussion. And that separation is what allows stability to exist even in the middle of public curiosity. Because without privacy, there is no space for normal life to function. And without normal life, everything becomes performance. That is why boundaries matter, not just for public figures, but for how society engages with information in general. Respecting those boundaries is what keeps discussion grounded rather than speculative. And as this particular narrative eventually settles, what becomes most important is not the rumor and not the speculation, but the reminder it leaves behind. That behind every headline is a human reality that is often far more complex than what is shown. That emotional language can shape perception more than facts can if facts are missing. And that understanding always requires more patience and reaction. So when this story is remembered later, it may not be the details that matter most. It may be the reminder it offers about how easily narratives form, and how important it is to pause before turning uncertainty into assumption. Because in the end, not every dramatic-sounding story reflects a dramatic reality, and not every moment of silence hides something extraordinary. Sometimes, it simply reflects life, continuing quietly, privately, and humanly beyond the reach of public interpretation. And that is where the story truly ends, not in shock, not in breakdown, but in perspective, a reminder that real lives are always more nuanced than the stories told about them.